Welcome back. It is time for Silver and Black today. Whether you're listening to us on Odyssey, yes, we are an Odyssey original podcast. Also, you're probably listening to us on Sunday morning, 98.5 The Fan in Las Vegas, as well as 1140 The Bet. If you're listening to us over the air, we welcome you to game day. Otherwise, you're listening to us on Thursday. I am Scott Gulbransen, joined by my co-host Mo Moton. He is a national NFL writer for Bleacher Report, also the NFL and Raiders columnist over at sportsnot.com. Mo, let's jump in the Raiders news heading into the weekend. We're going to prepare to look at the New Orleans Saints here in a couple minutes later on in the show. But first, we want to get to some of the things going on around Raiderdom, Raider Nation, including a move yesterday the Raiders made, and that was they signed Jackson Barton to the active roster, the tackle to the active roster, and they also re-signed defensive tackle Kyle Pecco and cornerback Bryce Cosby to the practice squad. This, of course, came after the Raiders traded interior defensive lineman Jonathan Hankins to the Dallas Cowboys for a seventh-round pick, or sixth-round pick, in next year's draft, the 2023 draft. Mo, the Raiders making moves near the deadline here. Talk a little bit about that. You called this out. Yeah, it's tough sometimes. We got to beat our chest and talk about how right you were. And a couple of shows ago last week, you said pay attention to healthy scratches on the Raiders roster. And guess what Jonathan Hankins has been the last couple weeks, or he got against the last game,
Chiefs.
Last Sunday against the Chiefs. He played, Scarry was a scratch, but then against the Texans, played just a couple plays. So talk a little bit about the move, and again, why you told people to look for those healthy scratches as we approached the deadline.
Yeah, if you run back the tape to, I believe, after the Raiders lost to the Chiefs, I know a lot of people were up in arms about that, and that was the focus. But I said, going into the bye week, usually teams make changes. And one of the things that I noticed over the years is that usually if a player starts to see his snaps trend downward, if he's playing less snaps or playing fewer snaps, there's a possibility he may be benched for a younger player or may be traded if he has value. And Jonathan Hankins did not suit up against the Chiefs, didn't play. Neil Farrell made his season debut in that same game. And then they both played about the same amount of snaps against the Houston Texans. Jonathan Hankins played about 18% of the snaps, and then Neil Farrell Jr. played about 15% of the snaps. So the writing was on the wall. I didn't want to call Jonathan Hankins' name out simply because I didn't want to start rumors, but I just told people, pay attention to those healthy scratches because they will tell you what a coach's staff thinks about a certain player. And sure enough, Jonathan Hankins gets traded to the Dallas Cowboys on Tuesday.
Right, and they get draft capital, which is good for the Raider team. And some people will say, well, yeah, but that's later in the draft. It doesn't matter. You get those picks, you stockpile them because you can take those picks later on and trade to go up, whatever you're doing. So it makes a lot of sense. Of course, then they bring on Kyle Pecco to the practice squad, a guy that I know a lot of fans out there like during the preseason. And the Raiders are making moves and trying to adjust this roster as they see fit. And we talked about it earlier this week and last week, too, about the Raiders, where they're at 2-4, still 2 games below 500, still very much alive in a season where they could make the playoffs, no matter what the statistics say. So you didn't expect them to be big sellers or big buyers, and these types of moves when you have some excess at the position. And a lot of people say, well, geez, Jonathan Hankins, they like him. He's a solid interior player, but he wasn't exactly a guy that you wanted to write home about. He wasn't exactly a guy who's going to change the trajectory of that defensive front, which, of course, you and I have talked about at times has struggled. And so giving up that piece, does that tell you anything else about what Dave Ziegler and Josh McDaniels might be thinking heading into this middle third of the season?
Right now, nothing other than they feel confident in Neil Farrell Jr. soaking up more snaps. We talked about Cleveland Farrell in our last show, getting more looks on the interior. He played a lot of B-gap snaps. I believe he played a quarter of his B-gap snaps last week against the Houston Texans. So he's getting looks at defensive tackle. And then, of course, Matthew Butler, who I believe only suited up for 2 games this season. I expect him to get a sprinkle of snaps as well. So I know a lot of fans say, well, we love Jonathan Hankins, what he's done for the Raiders defensive line and run defense, but the writing has been on the wall. They didn't draft 2 defensive tackles to let those guys sit on the sideline and do nothing. Eventually, those guys are going to be expected to blossom into something. Now, people say, well, they're 4th and 5th rounders. Well, Maxx Crosby was a 4th rounder. Nate Hobbs was the 5th rounder. Hunter Renfrow was a 5th rounder. I'm not saying Butler and Farrell will blossom like those guys, but there's nothing wrong with trading a player who was losing his workload anyway and developing your young talent.
Correct. So, Mo, let's think about this too. Now, we've talked about positions of need on this Raiders team as they head into the rest of the season. Of course, offensive line, we talked a lot about that. You and I have wanted them to go get a veteran on that line, but with Munford and how he has progressed, it looks like he may have locked up that spot. He has been one of the best in the league, did not allow a pressure last week against the Texans, as a matter of fact. He's coming into his own. So I'm not sure that they're going to do anything on that offensive line. What else could this team do? You are covering, you're like white on rice when it comes to the trade deadline for Bleacher Report this coming week. When you look at what's out there and what this team could do, I don't expect the Raiders to trade any draft capital for a player that's a rental player or for a player that's only going to be a marginal upgrade. So I don't see them doing a lot. Am I wrong there? Is there somebody out there, defensive back, someone who you think could be a target for this team as we head into the trade deadline after next weekend?
I think if Ziegler could get a decent player for a 4th or 5th rounder, I think he would bite on that. I don't think he would want to trade away an early round pick, a 1st, a 2nd, or even a 3rd. Probably wants to save those picks so he can finally, accumulate some young players from the draft, because as we know, this year he started off with a 3rd round pick. So probably wants a 1st, a 2nd this year. But I would say that if you can upgrade the cornerback position, I would bite on that with a 4th round pick if possible. I talked to you off air about Greedy Williams with the Browns. Yes. I think he's the odd man out because they have Newsome on the inside. They have Denzel Ward, of course. They drafted Martin Emerson this year. So he's going to be on the out, I believe. He has an expiring contract, had 1 good year, then he got hurt, but you're getting him for half of a season. If he could play well for half of a season, I would say it's worth it. If he's available for a 5th round pick, I would bite on that. William Jackson, of course, is the most known name that's out there because the Washington Commanders have made it known that they're looking to move him. Now, he may be a little expensive because he's a little more experienced. He has more pelts on the wall than Greedy Williams. But if you can get him somehow for a 4th round pick, I would definitely do it. A lot of fans were calling for Daron Payne after the Raiders traded Jonathan Hankins. I don't see that happening because Daron Payne's going to want a new contract very, very soon. And the Raiders have been paying players this offseason, and you can't pay everybody. So I think it comes down to if the Raiders can get a player, a rental, that's not going to cost them much now, that's not necessarily going to ask for a big contract next year or later this year, you bite on it.
Yeah. Also, we saw yesterday, of course, Robert Quinn going, a guy that I liked and I thought would be a nice fit for the Raiders at some point, going back to the preseason when we talked about it and the fact that they might be shopping him. He goes to the Eagles. The Eagles are all in, I said to you earlier today, Mo, and you like that. I mean, where they're sitting with the record they have, that's a bold move for them. Interior of that defensive line, no question. Here's one nobody's talked about. We don't know, fans today, if you saw this morning and yesterday, Darren Waller trending on Twitter with Raiders fans. Raiders fans are really down on the guy. He's hurt, right? So people are questioning his desire to play football. They're calling him a ripoff artist. All this stuff, which I think is unfair. But nonetheless, are there moves on offense that this team could make despite the weapons they have? They have Foster Moreau at tight end, but if Darren Waller, who was back at practice yesterday, but if he can't get back out there, or are there other positions on offense you would consider if you're the Raiders?
I would never turn down an offensive lineman, a capable offensive line that can step in and play right away, simply because it's an invaluable position. If one guy goes down, then you're in trouble. You may be in trouble if you don't have any depth there. So I'm still on the offensive line as far as you can bring in another guard, because we all know I'm not a fan of a certain guard that's starting right now. And if you can upgrade over him, I think that'll be pretty solid. But the problem is teams aren't just giving away starting offensive linemen.
No. Even those that are not in contention and may be out of it for the rest of the season, you still got to protect your quarterback. And so teams aren't willing to trade. And plus, offensive linemen, as the Raiders have learned, hard to come by. And that guy's name might rhyme with Mars, maybe. But yeah, I mean, but what about skill positions? Anything at skill position? I talked about Waller, tight end. The Raiders have a couple good tight ends, obviously. But if you start to look at injury, if you start to look at opportunities where you can upgrade, might they consider another receiver if someone's available and the price is right?
I honestly don't think so. I just simply believe they have enough depth at those skill positions. Just when Wendy would be pleased to know that I'm mentioning Jesper Horsted. I think he had a pretty good preseason. I mean, if it comes down to it and he's prepared to play, I think he can contribute. As far as we know, Foster Moreau is fine now. He came back last week against the Houston Texans. So, you know, if Darren Waller for some reason is held out, not for some reason for his hamstring injury, if he's out again, Foster Moreau will step up and Horsted will also step up as well. So I'm not worried about tight end or wide receiver with the way Mac Hollins has been playing. I know T. Billy, Tyron Johnson, now off the roster. So still, I'm just not so worried about the wide receiver position or the tight end position or the running back position because Josh Jacobs has been running the show. And those young guys haven't been getting touches. So if you need depth there, you just dust off one of those young rookies, put them in the game.
Yeah, speaking, and I want to read this out because I got an email from the NFL previewing the coming week. And I want to read this with Josh Jacobs because, of course, you look, Josh Jacobs, he's tied for second in the NFL with 6 rushing touchdowns. And fourth was 774 scrimmage yards this season. I mean, think about that, 774 yards. He's had 150 scrimmage yards and a rushing touchdown in each of his past 3 games. If he reaches those marks again this Sunday against the Saints, he will become the 5th player in NFL history with at least 150 scrimmage yards and a rushing touchdown in 4 consecutive games, and the first since Pro Football Hall of Famer LaDainian Tomlinson did it in 2006. We talked a lot about Josh Jacobs last show and during the mailbag show yesterday on Wednesday as well, Mo. This guy has the potential this year to really just do something special. And the only thing standing in his way, I think, because that offensive line, and I don't know if you saw, did you see the video of him congratulating and thanking his offensive line towards the end of the game yesterday? It was awesome, or excuse me, on Sunday. It was awesome. But he, against the Saints, I think, has a great opportunity to actually hit that mark because the Saints are struggling a little bit, even though they have a strong defensive front.
Yeah, the Saints used to be known as a team that didn't allow a lot of rushing yards. I remember they had this streak where they didn't allow 100 rushing yards for, consecutive seasons, I believe it was. Yep. Not the same defense anymore. I'm surprised because Dennis Allen is a defensive-minded head coach. Raiders fans know who Dennis Allen is, but he had that defense performing at a high level as a coordinator, but as a head coach, not so much. It's trended down. And if you saw the last Thursday night game against the Cardinals, Eno Benjamin, who's, by the way, is on my fantasy team, ran wild against the Saints. Full disclosure, he ran wild against the Saints. So I believe that Josh Jacobs, at the level he's performing, could do the same against that defensive front.
Yeah, no question. Good stuff. All right, we're going to step aside for our first break here on Silver and Black today. If you're listening to us on the radio, 98.5 The Fan, hello, Las Vegas. We appreciate you being with us. If you're listening to us on the Odyssey Sports Podcast Network, thank you. Make sure you subscribe to the show. If you're listening to us anywhere and you haven't subscribed yet, go do it wherever you get your podcast. When Mo and I come back, we're going to ask the question, is Derek Carr disrespected around the NFL? One Raiders player, a very significant player, seems to believe so. So we'll talk about that as well as talk about the season he's having here on Silver and Black today. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. Silver and Black today. We talk all things Las Vegas Raiders football. Hi, everybody. I am Scott Gulbransen, joined by my broadcast partner, as always, Mr. Mo Moton. He is the NFL writer, national NFL writer, I should say, for Bleacher Report. Also, Raiders columnist up on sportsnot.com. Make sure you follow him on Twitter at Mo Moton. That's with an E, M-O-E-M-O-T-O-N. And I am at LV Gully. We appreciate you all being with us here to talk about Raiders football. Okay, Mo, we want to bring this up because all we hear about when we talk about Derek Carr is love or hate, love or hate, love or hate. Very little in the middle, if you will, except on this show where we tend to be more objective, I think, than some. But I wanted to play this clip because there's a show called Air It Out. It's on the Fubo TV. The Fubo TV is a streaming service, which I happen to be a customer of, full disclosure. The show had Maxx Crosby on. Maxx Crosby, great interview. I suggest you see the whole interview. But Maxx Crosby talked about not only his game and kind of was he getting credit and his team and all that kind of stuff, and talked about a bunch of different subjects, including who he grew up watching. So again, I recommend you watching it and listening to it. But I want to play this clip because, of course, TJ Humanzada brought up the unbring-upable, approachable subject about Derek Carr. So listen to this and listen to his answer, and then we'll come back and talk about it.
Derek Carr.
No, we're not going there.
He's your quarterback.
Oh, shit. See how you do me?
Do you feel
Here we go.
he gets his respect across the league?
I don't think so. You know, a lot of people have their opinions. But I think Derek, you know, since day one, Derek's been here almost 10 years. And he's always been a bright spot on the team, no matter what's been going on. He's had like 6 head coaches. There's always change. But he's been consistent through the whole thing. So I know it's easy to point the finger at the quarterback and blame him, but it takes a whole team to win. And I feel like Derek has done a great job. And I've been here 4 years now, and every year he's gotten better and better. So like you said, no matter what anybody else has to say, like Derek's a super confident dude, and like he's a guy you want on your team. You know, I think he does a great job. So I got DC's back till the end.
There you go. So there's Maxx Crosby on Air It Out on Fubo TV. Thank you for the video from them. Mo, thoughts on what Maxx Crosby said about his quarterback? Because we hear some people who don't like Derek Carr talk about how people don't respect him. Sounds a lot like Maxx Crosby has a lot of respect and looks at his history and really thinks that it's important to this team in the locker room.
When I see clips like that, the first thing that comes to mind is, what do you expect him to say? what else?
Yes,
I mean,
honestly,
yes. I mean, he's not going to badmouth his quarterback on a show that gets a lot of viewers and listens. I mean, he's going to talk up his quarterback. I would expect any player in that locker room to say nothing but nice things about Derek Carr, especially when you have to go back to that locker room the next day or later in that day. So it's exactly what I expected him to say. I think the important discourse here is he really disrespected among the media? And a lot of fans will say, yes, he is. I would say he's overlooked simply because his numbers aren't flashy. He's not the type that's going to throw for 400-plus yards. Joe Burrow, I believe, threw for 480-plus against the Atlanta Falcons last Sunday. He's not going to throw for a ton of yards. He's not a loud guy, not going to give you a lot of sound bites. Very well-spoken at the podium, well-coached. He's not going to give you any bulletin board material. And the other thing is, to be honest, he hasn't won a lot of games as a starter. Now, I know it's a team game. You win and lose as a team. But let's be honest, when it comes down to wins and losses, we always start off talking about the quarterback's performance. That's just the way it is. And he hasn't won a playoff game in his career. So when it comes down to conversation of, Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, those guys all have playoff wins. Now, Justin Herbert is on the come up. He doesn't have the playoff wins, but guess what? He has the flash. He has the size. He has the arm. The Chargers are a lot of times a lot of people's Super Bowl darlings and favorites before the preseason, and they fall apart with injuries as they are now.
Always.
And so with Justin Herbert, especially with the way Justin Herbert got his job, if you remember, it was a mishap with Tyrod Taylor's IV or his some type of
cartilage. His rib. Right. He was getting a shot in the rib.
He was getting an injection basically,
yeah.
and there was something that happened there, and he couldn't play. Justin Herbert steps in, and he takes over the job, and automatically he's throwing for 300+ yards and throwing for multiple touchdowns and having duels with Tom Brady when Tom Brady was pretty good. So this is why Justin Herbert gets the type of media attention that he does, and Derek Carr doesn't. Derek Carr's been around, as you said, as Maxx Crosby said, he's been around for a decade. He's had multiple coaches, which is commendable that he's still around after all of that. I said it just on Twitter. No bad quarterback survives that many coaching changes. No. Usually with a coaching change comes a change at quarterback. So it lets you know how good Derek Carr is. On the other side of it, he hasn't won a lot of games. Again, I know it's a team game, but he doesn't have a playoff win on his resume in 9 years. So this is why he gets overlooked.
Well, and you hit the nail on the head with me, and the reason I brought this clip up, a couple things, and I have a grumpy old man complaint about it too, which I'll get to, which is I don't remember players going back a couple decades, right? Going back to some of the guys, you know, the Emmitt Smiths, the Troy Aikmans, to use the Cowboy examples, or going back to the Elways, or going back to some of those quarterbacks during that 80s, 90s era, early 2000s. I didn't hear them talking a lot about, well, we don't get respect. We don't get respect. I don't understand what the fascination is. And even the question, I mean, two former players interviewing another player, I get it. It's kind of inside baseball. But this idea he's not respected, you earn respect. You earn respect. Now, some fans, and I agree with you, Mo, some fans might argue, well, the media doesn't give him enough credit. What does he want credit for? I shouldn't say that. Derek Carr doesn't want credit. He's not asking for it. But what do they want credit for? That he's a top 5 quarterback when he's not? That he is a Super Bowl winning quarterback? He's not. Is he a very good quarterback with good numbers? Yes. To your point, no wins, no playoff wins. The Justin Herbert thing, there's been a lot of negative press this week about Justin Herbert with some former players commenting in their new broadcast roles about Justin Herbert being overhyped. Is he overhyped? Probably in some ways. And the only reason I say that is because there's nothing people love more than potential, right? Especially young players. If Justin Herbert was a 10-year player, he would be Derek Carr, right? Now, I know he puts up some bigger numbers, but my point there is if he hadn't won any playoff games and he hadn't won a Super Bowl or led his team to those kind of big playoff runs, then he'd be in the same boat. So I want to hear your thoughts, because this idea of give me respect because I've played for 10 years and I've gone through 6 coaches, there is a certain amount of respect for him for that. I see it on hear it all the time. But the respect for being one of the greatest quarterbacks to ever play the game, the respect for being a winning, playoff winning championship quarterback, that you can only earn by doing it, correct?
Right, but I want to caution and say, where is the disrespect coming from? And good point. A lot of times fans will look at certain promotions for matchups in the AFC West, and you'll see Russell Wilson, you'll see Patrick Mahomes, you'll see Justin Herbert featured, and you don't see Derek Carr. And it's like, okay, where's Derek Carr on this feature promotion for a football game? And that part of it I get, because look at what Russell Wilson is right now.
Yeah,
I think Russell Wilson. I'm not saying Russell Wilson's a bad quarterback, but he is easily the worst quarterback in that division. He's a bottom quarterback in the league right now.
Right.
Justin Herbert, while he's good, he hasn't taken the leap a lot of people expected him to take. Now, Keenan Allen's been hurt. Mike Williams is on IR now. I get that, but no one's giving those excuses to Derek Carr. Derek Carr last year played basically without a number 1 wide receiver and helped lead the Raiders to the playoffs. So he deserves respect for that. Yeah. In fairness, Derek Carr is not standing in front of an opponent saying, I deserve respect, pounding the table. It's a lot of discussion from the outside people, the media, guys like you and me, Hushmanzada, of course, Orlando Scandrick, I believe that was next to him.
Scandrick, yep.
Those guys are asking, is he disrespected? Because we've talked about it on the show. He's very polarizing. A lot of people either really like him and say he's good, really good quarterback. There's some people who think he's a top 5 quarterback, and there's some people that go, when are the Raiders just going to move on from him? We're sick and tired of seeing this. He's been around for this long, and he hasn't got the Raiders to a playoff win. It's time to move on. There are 2 factions there, and this is why you get the discussion. Is he respected enough? Is he being disrespected?
Well, and here comes, when I watch Derek Carr on a broadcast, an NFL broadcast, I hear nothing but praise of him from play-by-play. And of course, they want you to watch the game, because if they say, hey, this guy sucks and this term's terrible, you're going to turn out the game. but no, I think they mean it. I mean, you listen to the broadcasters and they talk about it. They talk about what he's done. They praise him for what he's done. It's the blowhards who talk for a living, who are getting clicks, who want this stuff, that are, I think, what they're talking about being disrespected. Those are the critics. The critics are always there. Mo, you have critics. I have critics, right? We saw our good friend Murph this week talk about him being fan content, and how a couple broadcasters, I forgot where they were from, went on their podcast to criticize fan content and how terrible it was and so on. Now, is there terrible fan content? Sure. Is there terrible media content? Sure. Is there good stuff? Yes. So I get it. But those guys, with the social media, and this is what I was a long way of getting to this, the social media impact on our society, the social media impact on sports, with a young guy like Maxx Crosby, and we'll get to Maxx Crosby in a second because he's having an amazing year. I think it takes on such a large piece of their mindset that, and you hear it in questions like this because that's where it comes from. It's not coming from, CBS or NBC broadcast team when they're doing a game. It's coming from people who get paid to give an opinion.
What I always tell people, and I tell young writers this too, be careful where you're absorbing your criticism from. Because
good point.
If Joe Schmo, whoever, some rando on Twitter, Raider Tom 56785 is saying, yeah, you suck, your articles are garbage. Who is that to criticize you? You don't know that person's credentials. Is that person have the standing to critique your work?
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying. There's constructive criticism and there's negativity. A lot of times negativity is just a lot of outside noise from random people who just want to have their voice heard. Constructive criticism comes from people with pelts on the wall, credentials, people who've played the position. So when I hear commentary about Derek Carr and it's coming from Dan Orlovsky or Kurt Warner, I listen because those guys have played in the NFL. Now, I know Dan Orlovsky isn't a Super Bowl champion like Kurt Warner is.
Doesn't matter.
But he's played the position. He understands the position. He knows how to break down the game. So you have to respect his voice on things. Mm-hmm. But some guy, in living in, I want to say in New Jersey somewhere, gardening in his yard says, oh, Derek Carr sucks. We need to replace him and the Raiders need to move on. That guy's opinion doesn't really mean much. And to your point, with social media now, everyone has a voice.
Yeah.
And I would tell people, anyone with a public job, whether you're a writer, an athlete, anything you do, be careful where you take be careful where you take your criticism from. Be careful who you listen to on the critique of your work, because not everyone's opinion has value to it. And I would say to Maxx Crosby or any athlete, block out the noise from the random people. If you want constructive, real criticism, talk to former players, talk to coaches, and keep it there.
Yeah, absolutely. And that doesn't mean people aren't entitled to their opinion. If you think Derek Carr sucks, fine. That's up to you. Yeah. You're entitled to it. And we move on. Mo, we got about 30 seconds before we go to the next break, but I wanted to bring up Maxx Crosby too. He talked a lot about in that interview as well, if he was getting enough respect, and he didn't use those words, and I didn't get the sense that it bothers him at all. But you look at him this year, he's 22 solo tackles, second in the NFL. He's tied for 13th with 6 assists, tied for 4th with 6 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, which is also tied for 4th, a 90.5 ranking from Pro Football Focus. Maxx Crosby's on fire. I think he gets attention when you're watching the Raider broadcast, but nationally, I do think in this case, not disrespect, but he is a great story, and he continues despite the fact that defensive front hasn't been the best all season. This guy just continues to work his tail off and become one of the better ends in all of football.
Yeah, he's not going to get the national praise compared to Nick Bosa, because let's be honest, Nick Bosa was drafted, I believe, 2nd overall. Maxx Crosby was drafted in the 4th round. Now that's a greater story, a 4th rounder to rise up the way he's rose up. But when you look at these TV shows and you look at these media pundits and people, talking heads such as you and I, a lot of times they're talking about the surface level things. So they're going to talk about first-round picks, stars, and things of that nature. And I'm not saying Maxx Crosby is not a star, but Nick Bosa is a more recognizable name. On top of that, he has a brother who's also pretty good, and Joey Bosa in the NFL, so he's going to get the national talk. And the 49ers have been a perennial playoff contender, so his team is going to get more attention on top of that. So when Raiders fans are saying, well, Maxx Crosby is disrespected, I understand it, because he's not getting the same acknowledgement as some of the other players who are drafted in the 1st round. But also understand, when you watch TV shows, it's all about getting the most eyeballs and getting the casual fans to tune in. So they're not going to talk about a 4th round, someone who's drafted in the 4th round versus someone who was drafted 2nd overall and on a perennial playoff contending squad.
Well, and also don't forget the college angle here. Nick Bosa went to Ohio State. Ohio State has a massive, massive fan base. So they know if they hype that player, people who love Ohio State still love Nick Bosa. Even if they're Vikings fans, they will root for Nick Bosa on the 49ers because of the Ohio State connection. So that's why. But a great interview with Maxx Crosby, and I love the piece about the guy. So it's very cool, and I mean PEACE about the guy. So go check out the Fubo interview. Yep.
So Scott, you're saying Eastern Michigan doesn't have a large fan base? Shout out to the Eastern Michigan fans who root for Maxx Crosby, by the way.
So
we see you out there.
I've been to Ypsilanti, Michigan several times. Back when I worked at UNLV, we played them, and I've been there. So I've been to Eastern Michigan, and a great little campus, but it's in the shadow of Ann Arbor. So it's very close to Ann Arbor, so people don't really, it's like if you're an Eastern Michigan alum or a person, you're there, but otherwise it's all Michigan country, so we get that. All right, we're going to take our next break here on Silver and Black today, an Odyssey original podcast. Also, show on 98.5, The Fan in Las Vegas. Thanks to all for joining us. When we come back, we're going to switch focus to the game coming up on Sunday, of course, against the New Orleans Saints. We'll talk about that matchup and how we see it going down. You're with Mo, you're with Scott. This is Silver and Black today. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back to the home stretch here on Silver and Black today, an Odyssey original podcast. Also a Sunday radio show on 98.5 The Fan in Las Vegas. Also the sister station, 1140 The Bet for those listening to us in Las Vegas. Good morning and have a good day. For those of us listening on the podcast, thank you. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast. You can also watch us on YouTube. Yes, we take our shows, we put them up on YouTube. You can watch them. Subscribe to the channel, hit the notification button, and then you can see Mo and I, and we'll wink at you or do something crazy. So make sure you join us there. Okay, Mo, let's turn our attention to this game against the New Orleans Saints. The Raiders coming off this win against Houston. I saw interesting feedback from Raiders fans saying, why are you guys making a big deal out of it? It's not the Super Bowl. They're still under 500. But the Raiders seem to really put things in gear. They now face a New Orleans team that's been up and down, struggled with some injuries to key players, still has some pieces on defense, still has some pieces on offense, but a team in transition. When you look at this game, the opportunity for the Raiders to go on the road, the first of 2 consecutive games in the Eastern time zone, by the way, what do you look at this game and say, okay, this is going to be good for the Raiders? And then what challenges do you think they'll face that could put a wrinkle in their plans to get win number 3?
2 big challenges the Raiders face. Number 1, the Saints have more time to prepare for the Raiders. The Saints played last Thursday against the Cardinals, so they had a few extra days. No excuses, though. The other thing is Alvin Kamara. I know he's not racking up yards as people are accustomed to seeing from him, but he's still been over 100 yards from scrimmage in his last 3 games. So I believe he had close to 200 yards from scrimmage against the Seahawks a few weeks ago. So don't sleep on Alvin Kamara. He is healthy. He is playing. Now, they may not have Michael Thomas, who's been out since, I believe, week 3, Jarvis Landry, who's been out for multiple weeks, but Chris Olave, who, by the way, is on your fantasy team, is playing very well, and he's probably one of a rookie of the year candidate if Kenneth Walker doesn't run away with it, with the Seahawks being a starter over there over Rashad Penny. But Chris Olave is an offensive rookie of the year candidate, and he's playing very well, so the Raiders are going to have to contain him. The other thing I noticed is the Raiders are still having problems guarding tight ends. It's not just Travis Kelce. They have to keep an eye on Juwan Johnson, who scored 2 touchdowns against the Cardinals. The Cardinals also have issues guarding the tight end, just like the Raiders. So if Michael Thomas and Jarvis Landry don't suit up, watch out for the tight end position and Juwan Johnson.
Yeah, absolutely. You look at the Saints too. I think here's an interesting storyline. A quarterback that is a kind of a bridge guy, a guy you like to have as an insurance policy, Andy Dalton. Andy Dalton, season high in completions, passing yards, 361, and a TD 4 in week 7. It was his 32nd 300-yard game. But Andy Dalton, we saw last week that he's still throwing quite a few interceptions at times. And so the Raiders defense has the opportunity here to maybe take advantage of that and have that young defensive backfield gain some more confidence and play. Do you see, outside of the couple players you talked about, when you look at an Andy Dalton run offense versus a Jameis Winston run offense, does that favor the Raiders defense and how they've been struggling and where they've been so far in 2022?
I wouldn't say it favors the Raiders defense. I would say it could give the Raiders defense more issues because with Andy Dalton under center, the Saints have been more apt to use Taysom Hill, who's a guy you have to make sure you know where he is on the field because he can throw the football, he can run the football. I believe he caught a touchdown pass last week. So Taysom Hill, I think, is the guy you circle and want to watch outside the obvious Alvin Kamara and Chris Olave, who I just talked about. Make sure you know where Taysom Hill's line up because in his good weeks, he could run for 100 yards. He can catch for maybe, he can get a couple of catches maybe in the red zone. They may hand it off to him so he can throw downfield on a couple of trick plays. So he's the guy I think that could wreck the game if the Raiders are not careful. As far as the defensive side of the ball, Cameron Jordan is the guy I circle. The guy has been around for nearly a decade or more, and he's still racking up pressures. So make sure you get him blocked on that front line because he can also wreck the game. Marshawn Lattimore may not play. He has an abdomen injury. So in the secondary, Devontae Adams, I think this is a big, big game for Devontae, close to 200 receiving yards for him.
Wow, 200 receiving. Look at that prediction from Mostradamus. Woo! Somebody's picking up their phone right now and they're betting on the prop bets. Another guy, Demario Davis, linebacker there. So you talk about the Saints and some of that defensive. He's got 5 sacks on the season so far. The offense line will get tested again, right? With some of those guys up front there, despite the injury on the backside up front. The Saints still present a good challenge for this offensive line. If they go down to New Orleans, the offensive line, and they're able to contain Jordan and Davis, to me, that'll be another huge shot for this team.
Yeah, absolutely. And with Davis, I want to say if Darren Waller does play in this game, don't expect Darren Waller to rack up 100 yards. It'll be a big boost for the Raiders offense, but Demario Davis is one of the best off-ball linebackers in the league, and he can cover. So I wouldn't expect Darren Waller to go off. This is why I'm so high on Devontae Adams on the perimeter because that's where the Saints are susceptible in their secondary. They're susceptible on the edges, on the outside, on the boundary. As you get inside, a little tougher against the passing with coverage. But I would say that Darren Waller being the X factor here, him suiting up is just him being on the field, his presence, as I mentioned after that Chiefs game. If he's able to just get on the field, the Saints have to roll coverage to him because you're not going to leave him open. You're going to probably double cover him in certain areas. So if he could just suit up, I think it'll, again, open up things for Devontae Adams and even Hunter Renfrow. Maybe he gains some momentum. I know he had some catches in the last game, starting to find his rhythm in that offense. It'll also be good for him.
Absolutely. Let's switch to the other side. We look at the Raiders' defense itself. We see Chandler Jones really picking up steam. What a great first half against the Texans last Sunday. And then, of course, you have Maxx Crosby, who we talked about last segment as well. You have the new defensive line without Jonathan Hankins, even though he's been not playing very much. You have the challenges up front, and you see the offense of that New Orleans team having a Taysom Hill to challenge what has already been difficult for this team to cover, which is the tight end position. Even though you can call him a tight end, whatever you want to call Taysom Hill, a Swiss Army knife. The challenges up front for this team, too. Talk a little bit about that. Do we see Chandler Jones and Maxx Crosby? Do they have the opportunity to really get in there and wreak havoc on the pocket for Andy Dalton?
Yeah, when Jameis Winston was starting, part of the reason Jameis Winston is hurt right now with back and ankle injuries is because that offensive line wasn't able to protect him. He was taking a lot of hits. The offensive line has tightened up recently, so I wouldn't expect a bunch of sacks here. Unless there's a mismatch here or Graham does something with his defensive line that we haven't seen before that the Saints don't expect. But what I'm be looking at is the interior defensive line. I know Hankins hasn't played a lot of snaps, but the Raiders are high on Neil Farrell Jr., their 4th-round rookie, Matthew Butler, their 5th-round rookie, and seeing more of Cleveland Farrell out there. I think those guys can make this game a signature game for that interior defensive line unit to say, look, Hankins is not here anymore, but we got a trio of young guys, a rotation of young guys that can make plays on the inside on run and pass down. So I think this is a big test for them. And we talked about Alvin Kamara, of course, because they're going to have to stop him in the run game as well as a pass game. But even on the ground, I think those guys can prove a point to say, look, we're blossoming into something special on the interior.
Yeah, and we saw the Raiders do well against the Houston Texans run. They had a successful few series to start the game, but then the Raiders really battened down the hatches and did well. You look at the series, the Raiders lead the series 7-6-1. Raiders have won the last two. Of course, you remember the Raiders 34-24 just a couple seasons ago. Mo, we talked last segment about possible acquisitions for this team, or I should say in the first segment, about possible acquisitions for this team. If the Raiders go out there and have similar struggles in the defensive backfield like we saw with Trayvon Merrick last week and we saw with Jonathan Abram and with Rocky Sin, does that start to maybe force their hand into looking, especially if they can win the game? If they lose the game, things change a little bit. But do we see them look at how they perform against New Orleans, and then does that perhaps make them a little more interested in what's available in the trade market?
I would say if Andy Dalton goes out there and throws for 300+ yards and the Saints rack up a whole bunch of yards through the air, you got to make a move, because Nate Hobbs is probably going to be out for about a month with broken bones in his hand, not coming back anytime soon. Even if the Raiders win the game, I'm going out to get a corner if I can at a reasonable price. But especially if Andy Dalton looks like the second coming of, I don't know, Peyton Manning Jr., you have to, because every quarterback has played relatively well against the Raiders defense. Yeah. It's time that defense, especially that secondary, has to step it up against who is now a bridge now quarterback in Andy Dalton. You don't want Andy Dalton going up and down the field on you, on your secondary. Those guys, Trayvon Merrick, Amik Robertson, our guy, Rocky Sin, Anthony Averett, especially Anthony Averett, who had his first taste of action, not first taste of action, but came back from surgery. He has to step it up, because I think it'll go a long way to help the confidence, garner some confidence in that secondary. Again, because if it doesn't look good, you got to make a move. And then I'm picking up the phone. If I'm Dave Ziegler, I'm picking up the phone and I'm calling about Greedy Williams or William Jackson.
Yeah, there you go. Any question that the Raiders go in with the same type of offensive mentality they had against Houston, who had a good defense as well? Give the ball to Josh Jacobs, establish that run. Hopefully they wear down that good New Orleans defense up front and at the linebacker core, and or do they, because of the injuries in the defensive backfield that you talked about, Lattimore, do they pass the ball more, or are we looking at a repeat of the Houston game?
Scott, whatever is working, don't change it. If it's working, don't mess with it. Jacobs has been on a tear over the last 3 weeks. Continue to feed him the football, because good things have happened to the Raiders when they do that. Now, you don't want to completely ignore the passing game, because I think Devontae Adams is going to have a big game with the injuries on the back end and Marshawn Lattimore not being on the field. But we talked about it. Balance the offense. Don't fall in love with the pass. Don't fall too hard in love with the run, but feed the hot hand. If Jacobs is hot, he's ripping off 5-6 yards per carry. By any means, feed him the ball, and you're probably going to win the game and control the tempo of it.
Yeah, him and Barkley, the top two running backs in the league right now, and they are just on fire. You just give them the ball. Let them go. That's all you got to do. So I agree with you. Okay, Mo, quick prediction. I'm going to give you mine first. Let's see. Last week, we were really close to one another. I got the Raiders in this one, not as high scoring as they had last week. I think it'll be on the road, a little bit more of a grind. I like the Raiders 28-24 down at the Caesars Superdome in New Orleans. What do you got?
I put out a column, my betting column, every Thursday, and I actually have the Raiders higher than you as the car is honking its horn behind me. I have the Raiders winning 34-31. I actually think it's going to be a shootout. Fans probably don't want to hear that, because if the Saints are putting up 31 without Michael Thomas and Jarvis Landry with Andy Dalton on the center, there's a sign of panic there. But if you look at the Raiders defense, it's just allow quarterbacks to move the football. And I don't expect anything different, because the Raiders haven't really changed anything through the first 7 weeks. So I think it's going to be close, as you said, going on the road with a team that's well prepared for you with a few days extra to prepare. I think it's going to be pretty close, but I think Daniel Carlson, who is perfect, by the way, in the season, 16 of 16 on his field goal attempts. I know he missed an extra point, but he's perfect on his field goal attempts. I think the Raiders win on a late fourth quarter field goal, 34-31.
There you go. Mo always has the flair for the dramatic. He should have been an actor. No. All right, there you go. So Mo and I both have the Raiders topping the Saints just by a little bit different score. All right, my man, it'll be interesting to see how it all unfolds down at the Superdome in New Orleans, the Caesars Superdome, of course. So They have a new name. It used to be Mercedes. Now it's gambling. It's Caesars. I can't keep up with all the name changes of the stadiums all the time, but there you go. Mo, I appreciate it. Make sure you check out Mo's recent columns up on Bleacher Report as well as sportsnot.com, where he writes about the Raiders. Follow him on Twitter at MOEMOTON. My friend, I will next talk to you on Tuesday.
Hopefully it's a good show, because I know if the Raiders lose, fans would want to burn it down, all of it. So hopefully the Raiders come out on top.
Yes, and enjoy your trick-or-treating on Monday, Halloween. And by the way, we will be back here with our post-game show on Sunday after the Saints versus Raiders. So wherever you get your podcast, check out myself and Murph from Raiders Fan Radio. Maybe even a special guest from outside the country will join us. We'll talk to you about that another time. But for Mo Moton, I am Scott Gulbransen. This has been Silver and Black Today, an Odyssey original podcast. Also, a farewell, a happy Sunday to our radio listeners on 98.5 The Fan in Las Vegas. Take care, Raider Nation. Enjoy the game, and we'll talk to you Sunday post-game here on Silver and Black Today. Bye-bye now.